project gets back to the sensitivity and understanding what we're measuring. Paige, DaShae, and Elias. Undergrad, Elias, Paige, and DaShae. Graduate students, master's level. Did all the work for this project because there was one slide in the other presentation where it basically said that we had to throw one out of our 18 measurements out for motor skills, and that was jump, standing long jump per body height. And that perplexed me a little bit. So I wanted to go back and look at these data. So this was primarily a couple of master's research projects, and I thought they were going to be able to be here, but they ended up not being able to, so I'm taking care of this one. Go back to this idea. Motor skills related to, associated with PA, fitness, body composition, status, overall. But how do we assess skills? Qualitative versus quantitative, product and process. Most of the time, all the time, we only do one. We pick one and we use it to be able to quantify how well it predicts those outcome variables. But do the current assessments of skill or motor coordination adequately capture the essence of skill appropriately? That is, are they sensitive enough to discriminate between levels? Do they have floor and ceiling effects? And are they developmentally valid, actually? So we have a lot of measurement issues that we need to overcome. And again, going back to the future, this work was started back in the 70s, basically, if I'm correct here, and some people in the room actually have done some of this work. But limited evidence, limited studies have actually addressed the relationship between qualitative and quantitative or process and product. Couple new ones we have here in 2012 popping and running. I have someone in the room that actually has worked on that, so she could give you a better idea on that data. But overall, we're going to talk about standing long jump today, because that's definitely, we have limited evidence there. Howard, Stricker, and Grana used 2 5-year-olds. Looked at the relationship between standing long jump distance and whole body sequences, qualitative, what the movement looks like. They came up with some correlations, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds. The strongest were 3 to 4-year-olds. Wilson and Brown used the whole body approach, the same as he felt, and associated with kinematics and kinetics. Found propulsive forces and body segment accelerations were predictive of changes in coordination patterns or stages. Clark et al. Indicated, on the other hand, that delays in peak extension velocities of the hip and ankle joints remain stable across childhood, specific childhood ages, and among skill levels in adults. I believe that is right. Is that correct?
That'd be correct.
Okay. Excellent. It's always well we can make sure you know what you're talking about here. So, data comparing movement pattern changes and jump distance is limited to cross-sectional data in early childhood. Pre-longitudinal screening of landing sequences, of standing long jump sequences generally limited to propulsive phase or takeoff. But it's kind of important that for standing long jump, we remain upright when we land. And what configuration of the body allows us to be able to land effectively and maximize distance. So we have a better measure of understanding. No real emphasis on what the landing looks like. We have hypothesized sequences for like trunk lean during the flight phase, proposed quite a while ago by Van Sant, but published by Rockford and Howerson in 1984, related to body positions at landing. Okay? So we have in flight. What do we look like in flight, which kind of relate to how we land. So, 3-step process that I'm going to talk about. Number 1, hypothesize landing sequences to see if they would be attributed to the developmental progression across time of pre-longitudinal screening. Then we have to add data for the takeoff sequences because we only really have data up until 7 years of age. And then we want to examine the association between the takeoff and the landing with jump distance to see how well we can predict outcome, the product. And we actually want to control for height and mass too. That's kind of an important idea, specifically when we're talking about distance. I'll just relate to it. I am not going to take the time to go over all of these, but understanding that we're looking at hypothesized developmental sequence for landing. So this isn't out there in the literature. What's the shank look like? Are we anterior? And we have pictures actually. Are we anterior or shank angle acute or obtuse relative to the ground? We look at foot action. How do you land? A 1-foot landing Do we have symmetrical 2-foot landing, where we have plantar flexion or neutral, landing flat-footed? Do we have symmetrical dorsiflex landing on the heel? So we're breaking this down into different levels. Arm action, no reach, slight forward reach, full forward reach, give or take, up to about 90, and then the last level would be an arm sweep as we pull our arms back right before we land. So qualitative changes in what the movement looks like. Here are some pictures right here. This is Paige's artwork. It's pretty nice, actually. So level 1, what does this mean? We're looking at, which one's that one? Level 1, acute anterior shank angle relative to the ground with a level 2 4-foot landing. We don't talk about the level 1 because that's pretty easy to delineate. When we jump, do we land with 1 or do we land with 2? So the level 2 is a 4-foot landing or possibly a flat-foot landing. Level 1, arm action, abducted parachuting arm action. So this is what we look like at a pretty low level. Perpendicular shank versus the anterior shank angle, a flat foot landing, and a slight, you can't really show this, but a slight reach, and then we drop them straight back down. So generally we're talking about a low or rudimentary type skill level in terms of process. Then we have more advanced, we have a level 2 obtuse anterior shank angle with a level 3 heel landing. So we're landing on our heel. We have full flow forward reach arm action at landing. So we're out here when we land. Next level, now everything's pretty much the same, except we swing our arms back. We have to be able to figure out how to control that center of mass and be able to land upright when we land. What do they look like over ages 4 to 12? We had 297 kids across the age range of 4 to 12. What did we find? Over time, the idea of level 1 occurrence decreased. The idea of level 2 increased across time. And this is what we look at when we're attempting to look at whether or not we're changing developmentally over time. We look at how well curves go up. So we're looking at the occurrence. What happens when the occurrence of one type of behavior is going up, another one has to go down. So we look at the idea of finding curves and looking at ups and downs in terms of understanding how we change developmentally. Landing, foot action. If we can see developmental trend for level 3 and level 2 interacting over time, as well as actually level 1, because what happens? We want to show a more advanced skill level as we age. So what happens? With our level 1? Initially, we show quite a bit of level 1, but then over time, we want to see a decrease. We want to see level 2, which we show at 80%, level 4, so we're having a little bit of issue with age here. But level 2 decreases over time, while level 3 increases over time. With landing action, it's a little more convoluted, but again, we have an increase in one type of behavior related to a decrease in another type of behavior. And we have level 3 and 4 here that really don't show up too much. So a very highly advanced level. Overall summary of trends. 2 levels of shank action demonstrated strong developmental trends. Levels 1 and 3 for foot action demonstrated fairly consistent developmental trends. And level 2 was most consistent across age. Pretty much we had a lot of people that demonstrated level 2 across age. Did show a developmental trend with level 3 until about age 10. Arm action, levels 1 and 2 demonstrated a trend across age, and 3 and 4 demonstrated consistent low probability, which means we didn't have a lot of kids showing that for highly advanced form. Overall, stronger developmental trends for ages 4 to 7, which actually agrees with the early Howard Stricker and Granted data. Levels generally seem to level off after age 7. So what happens? We develop early, in early childhood, 4 through 7, but then we kind of plateau and we level off quite a bit in terms of what our movement looks like. Leg action, this is published in terms of the takeoff sequences. I'm going to maneuver through this rather quickly here. Overall, what did we see for takeoff action? Not a whole lot. Levels 1 and 2 rudimentary type movements were not demonstrated. Pretty much every child, 95%, basically demonstrated either a level 3 or level 4 in terms of leg action at takeoff. Arm action at takeoff, equally ugly data, and this kind of mirrors something that Marianne Robertson just published with skipping, saying that with cross-sectional data, we have pretty much a plateau that occurs as we go through. I'm not exactly sure. I think her data was about 4 through 12 as well. So we don't see a whole lot of really strong data in terms of seeing children progress in one type of behavior and regress in another type of behavior. We have some specific trends here. Leg action, no developmental trends across age that we have in our age group. Approximately 95% of individuals demonstrated either a level 3 or level 4. So we're pretty well developed by, according to these data, by age 4, almost 4 or 5. Overall, these data demonstrate developmental trends for arm action, but not necessarily as much for leg action. Now, here's the question that I wanted to really get at. Understanding, can we predict distance by how we move? What our movement looks like. And let's first of all just look at this first column right here. Does height predict change in distance in early childhood, middle childhood, and late childhood for both boys and girls? And the answer is yes, for early childhood. In both boys and girls, height predicts jumping distance. But in 7 and 9-year-olds and 10 and 12-year-olds, we have a much less predictive explained variance in terms of height. So height predicts early, but not late. When we look at body mass, it's the opposite effect. Mass does not predict early in either boys or girls, but it predicts later, i.e. increased muscle mass, increased lean mass, helps produce the idea of jumping distance. Makes sense? So controlling for those two pieces of the puzzle, what's the individual explanation? What's the individual explained variance for takeoff and landing? Overall, if you look at 4 and 6 years of age, takeoff is significantly predictive of distance in 4 to 6-year-old boys and girls. But as we age, we actually decline quite a bit, which is where landing comes in. As we age, landing becomes more important with girls. In boys, it's actually rather consistent. A little bit more in 7 to 9 years of age, middle childhood, but we pretty much see a stronger predictive explained variance with landing than we do takeoff. So that's kind of interesting. Trends. Some sequences demonstrate developmental trends across age from 4 to 12, which we don't really have data on for standing long jump. The landing sequences seem to demonstrate stronger trends than takeoff sequences with respect to predicting jump distance. Height and mass play differential roles of age to influence jump distance. And takeoff predicts jump distance in early childhood, but not in middle and late. Landing does a better job late, and specifically for boys. We still have a lot of work to do to understand how we assess motor skills to be able to apply that to health-related outcomes, which is the important applied piece of that. When combining the influence of standing long jump sequences and jump distance, it would seem that it would be a valid composite measure of skill, and if you add those two together, it may be a better predictor of health outcomes over time. But we've got to be able to have solid predictors in terms of those outcome measures: physical activity, obesity, fitness. Standing long jump has been used for a measure of lower body strength or explosive power. But realistically, if you look at the correlations in children that we see in criterion measures of lower extremity strength, i.e. isokinetic or isometric force, or even leg press, those correlations aren't that high either. So when we're actually measuring the standing long jump, what are we measuring? Coordination and skill, partially, yes. Strength, yes, but embedded within this idea of strength is what? Neuromuscular mechanism, intra and intermuscular coordination factors that we don't really take into account when we look at strength, because we just call it strength. So overall, what are we looking at in terms of standing long jump sequence? We We want to get these data published so we can have a better estimate of understanding what our movement looks like and what the outcome is. Do they relate? Is it developmental? Does it predict? And that's pretty much the focus. And I recently have moved, so if there's any need to contact me for any reason, I do have some new contact information, but I don't have current stuff. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any questions, thoughts, comments on this piece of the puzzle? Yes.
I have two questions, but can I give you more samples about samples? Like, we have the same number for each age group, like 47.
Yes, pretty much the same. We combine data from a couple of different projects. So we have about the same distribution, boys, girls, as well as ages.
Do you have any idea of children, how you said, outside of school,
We do not have that data. No.
And then the next question is, do you have any, like, an idea why did you find correlation of the loving form?
Actually, it's kind of interesting. In throwing, we are arm dominant early, and then we begin to figure out how to use our core and trunk musculature effectively. So then that plays more into performance. It looks like we have kind of the same thing happening here in terms of what predicts early. Takeoff predicts early. Propulsive phase, we're beginning to figure out how to jump, but we have height that also plays into that. We're just beginning to figure that out, but in terms of now, once we get better at jumping, in terms of height, now we've got to figure out how to land and maintain an upright posture. So it's like a developmental idea for standing long term in terms of developing takeoff as well as being able to stay upright when you land. Yes, ma'am.
So I think you probably know that the nation is about to spend billions of dollars on the National Children's Study.
Yeah.
Or maybe they won't, since they can't seem to even decide on keeping the paying the bills. But that's another story. But anyhow, I'm the chair of the committee for motor function. And in order to decide, we have a 1 hour every so many months to test children on motor, cognitive, emotional, you name it, and so on, as well as take height and weight data and so on. So we'll probably get about 5 minutes every 6 months to test a child's motor function.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's this National Children's Study is about children's health.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you started out that way. We're trying to understand obesity, blah, 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 and whether children are healthy and so on. I would challenge us all to think about, and I'm really being challenged. I have a subcommittee or committee members that are working on this, to try to think about if you've got 5 minutes and you want to test both the locomotor, the postural, and the manipulative skills of children, when and what and why. So, you've gone from how far you jumped, and us use the standard line that you should be able to jump your height up until about age 10. And I think that's where you're getting the correlation between height and it might actually be better to do leg length than height, but that's another story. But really, why do we want to, for our assessment, do anything other than how far you jump? For your teaching, I totally agree that understanding how the child does it might help the child become a better jumper when their jump's not very effective. But why would we want to go any further than how far you throw? That you were talking about the Germans using product scores. Why don't we just use product scores? I mean, why in an assessment to help us understand whether children are behind in their quote fundamental motor skills?
Why haven't we? Because there was a big push to understand what the movement looks like, and we didn't understand what the product equaled and whether or not it was developmental. Right?
No,
Right?
we bought into an argument that the physical fitness people told us that jumping was not a measure of strength, leg strength.
Oh.
And we walked away from that and said, no, you're right, of course it's not leg strength. But we walked away from any other national test to test children's motor skills. Whoever said that the SAT was a measure of your intelligence either? I mean, but we tested anyhow. You know, and we just walked away from it. And these kinds of studies, and now I'm just stuck to blank because you said it, or it worked, on looking at these qualitative measures, let's just stick with how far you jump.
Well, it makes the argument better if we can say, you know what, they mean the same thing.
Well, they'll not ever mean the same thing.
They're related.
Yeah.
Well, throwing, that's pretty doggone strong. Throwing data, that's really
Oh,
strong.
the throw, if you look at the upper arm, all you have to do is do the humerus lag, and you've got the distance thrown. Or was it the forearm? I don't know.
I'd say the trunk.
Yeah.
You got the trunk? Yeah. That's
Yeah,
right.
you got
But
the
anyway,
trunk.
yeah, why don't we go back to it? Oh boy, that's an uphill battle, isn't it? But you know what? There's this other Iowa committee meeting, or committee report that said, hey, we should be measuring the standing long jump. So
I actually think, those of you not in the field, this is inside baseball talk. In 1898, there was a test of a man. You know what it was? You guys that are men? It was the vertical jump. The vertical jump. First you have to do how far you can reach, and then how high above your hand reach can you jump. Sargent, Harvard professor, a test of a man. I have a copy of it if you ever want it. I made a student go find it. But I couldn't believe it. I love the title, The Test of a Man. But the point is, if you wanted to have one measure of your gross motor ability to move your multi-segmented system in a coordinated way, why make it long? Why not just make it up? Okay. Just something to think about, you guys who like a test of a man.
Oh, by the way, so if you want to make it quick and dirty in 5 minutes,
Yeah.
standing long jump,
Yeah.
and get a gun.
A
Radar gun, that is.
radar gun, yeah.
Radar gun. Sorry. We're done. That's it. I expedited.
Oh, wow.
I want to thank you for being here, holding out to the very bitter end.
Yes.
You found your outcome.
Okay. Yeah. Children's studies.